everyone, and welcome back for another amazing episode of Becoming the Light from the Shadows of Abuse. And tonight I have another special guest with me, and her name, I apologize if I get this wrong, her surname is Dutch, and it is Marieke Zwinkels. So I hope that I've got that right. I'm going to hand over to her, but let me just tell you, so this evening she's actually going to be talking to us about her experience of being married to a narcissist and actually then trying to co-parent, and the lessons that she's learned from that she can then share with you. Because from what I've heard, from the way we were talking a few days ago before this recording, she's doing an amazing job of that within a very difficult situation and circumstance. And I know that for many people, they have how to co-parent with a narcissist is a huge issue. So I really look forward to what she's got to share. So I'm going to stop talking and hand over to you, Marieke. Welcome.
Thank you, Marieke. It's Marieke.
Marieke, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, thank you. And what I firstly like to say is, because I don't know, maybe there's some differences in cultural, right? Because the Netherlands is, of course, different from Australia. I wouldn't say narcissist, because that's a very, very complex personality disorder that needs a lot of testing and well, because narcissists usually don't go for that. There's a lot of people with that kind of behavior, but it's not diagnosed, right? So and it's actually not I think, well, in the system we're in, it's not smart to call it that towards the people that guide you in your process of divorce and childcare and all of that stuff, because it's very how would you say that in English? It likes sort of stamps.
Yes,
is that a right word?
It's a label. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a label, right? And then it's very hard after that to continue. Once I found that the people that help you on this way once see you as a person who would label their ex as narcissist, it's way harder to find goodwill and understanding for your situation. So whenever I talk about this, I usually just say that I recognize narcissistic behavior.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that I think is important.
And I think that in itself is a gem, in understanding that what we're dealing with is a set of behaviors.
Yes.
That is, in your case, undiagnosed. And for a lot of people, it's undiagnosed. They just recognize the behaviors. But already you've pointed out the difficulty that can go already with being recognized as someone who would label their partner as that.
Because when you do that, I had a conversation with a psychologist once, and she was helping me in a couple of sessions to communicate with this person, because as people who are listening already probably know, communicating with someone with a lot of narcissistic behavior is very different than communicating with people who don't have that. So she was helping me with that, and she said, well, it's actually very, I thought it was really funny. She said, it's very narcissistic to say about someone else that they are narcissistic.
Well, there is that, yes. There is.
And I thought, well, she's right, because it takes a lot of, I don't know, all sorts of research and tests and stuff like that to diagnose that even. So, yeah.
So that's really useful to kind of work on the basis of recognizing it as a set of behaviors rather than a set in stone label. And I totally understand, because one of the questions I get, people ask me, so that they have a problem and they say, so if I try and kind of take control of the narcissistic behavior, I then become the controller. So I then become narcissistic myself. So I can completely relate to what you're saying, this conundrum. And of course, the difference is that someone with these narcissistic behaviors and true narcissistic personality disorder, their motivation is very negative. It's all about self. Whereas if you're someone who is trying to navigate your way through this, you have a different motivation. And that's how I try and explain to people what the difference is, that your motivation is not to destroy that other person, even though you're trying to preserve yourself, so that's the distinction.
Yeah, and that's very true. And I've never seen in my ex-husband a will to destroy me, but I did see that because of his own issues, he could only think from his own perspective. So
Yes.
and that was the biggest problem, of course, for a lot of people who are listening, I guess, that when you have children together, the children are not the main source of motivation to take actions anymore.
Right.
And that's something that needs to be done for kids to feel, to be safe and to be able to grow up without too many issues of themselves. So so it's important to realize when you have to deal with someone with a lot of narcissistic behavior or with that kind of background, that normal conversation or conversations you would expect to have with someone when you have children together, that's just not an option.
Yeah. I can totally relate. I've been through this myself, being married to someone who has a lot of narcissistic personality traits, and I can
Yeah.
certainly relate to just not understanding why we couldn't parent, why he didn't want to be a parent, even why he couldn't see that it was necessary, and why his whole focus was on himself. It was very, very confusing. So I can completely relate to that. So
Yeah.
but already you sound, obviously from where you are now, you're incredible. You seem to have an incredible grasp on this. You're obviously in the best place possible with it, although none of us would wish this on anyone. So take us from here. So obviously this is a process to get to where you are now. But where did all this start for you? What can you see it was in your past that led you into this kind of relationship in the first place?
Well, for me, it's very obvious because my mother has the same sort of behaviors.
Yeah.
And so, and my father it's kind of the classical situation where you have a family with one person with these personality traits, and the other person, the other parent is what they call the facilitator. So, from a very young age, I was sort of, not consciously, I'm sure, but still you're being trained to, to accommodate and to adjust and to please and to solve problems that are actually not kid problems but adult problems.
Yeah.
So and I think in the Netherlands it's called what's that word again, it's called parentification. Is that a word in English too?
Oh,
Parentification.
parentification.
Right. Is that an English word?
Oh, not as far as I know, but that doesn't mean that it's not.
All right. Well, in Dutch, that word, which I roughly translate, it means that kids are being forced into the role of the adult.
Yes, I guess that's
And
what.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, and that means that, well, that's a habit that when you grow up and you get that, it's a habit that's not easy to break unless you're very aware of it. And so you will always seek out partners with the same, the same patterns because
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
because you know it and it's safe, and then it's what you already are completely used to. So that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, so
And yeah.
because we don't make the distinction of whether it was good or whether it was bad or whether it serves us or whether we don't. The mind is drawn to the familiar. And
Yes.
yeah, so subconsciously, unconsciously, it is drawn towards the pattern that it sees, it knows. Even
Yes.
if you know that's a pattern you don't want and that's what you want to avoid, it's almost inevitable. And I
Well,
think
it feels good because it's
it's familiar.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, what I've noticed, and because I work with other people too who have the same kind of backgrounds as me, that to me it seems that what you've been taught as a kid is that actually you sort of flip your reality. So so you, like, and I would say normal, but I don't mean really normal. I just mean a person who hasn't been raised by a parent with these narcissistic traits. So a normal person, when someone else would cross their boundary, they would automatically feel uncomfortable and they would reject that. They would,
Yeah.
they would sort of choose to go differently. And but I think with kids who have grown up in this type of situations, you sort of flip reality like 360. So someone crosses your boundary, you actually sort of go towards that. and and I see that with a lot of other um situations too. So when someone crosses your boundary, instead of rejecting it, you go towards it. When someone belittles you, instead of rejecting that, you go towards it. It's
Hmm.
like your whole reality is sort of flipped, and everything that is intuitively normal behavior is almost the exact opposite with people who have been raised in such a family.
Well, and of course, and that's because that's what you've been taught. It's the survival mechanism that you've adopted.
Yes,
You
exactly.
understand that you are not allowed to have boundaries,
Yes.
and that the best thing to do is just to agree and go along with everything. And
No,
you
no,
learn.
and I was quite a rebel as a teenager. So, but you have this pattern where you, even though you can feel something is off or wrong, you still sort of flip it in the course of a few days to, well, they can't help it, or they're not doing it on purpose, or it's okay.
Yeah.
That what I found in one book once, it was the glamoring of it. You glamour their behavior, or even glamour it into something good, like, well, I'm glad that he or she is so real with me, or they're so
Okay.
honest, or they're so so in touch with who they truly are, or whatever you make of it. Yeah.
So you find yourself excusing and justifying everything just so that
Yes.
you don't have to confront it, because you
Yes.
can't confront it.
Or even glamoring it up to the point that it's actually sort of admirable behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's safe. That's the
Yes.
easiest way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's so good to bring all of this up. So obviously then, because you had this in your childhood, you're saying you then married someone who was the same, who kind of gave you that safety and security that really is just a foe. It's
Actually, the opposite. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not safety and
Yeah.
security at all, but it seems it, because at least you know what to do. So what came about in that marriage for you? How was that? Because I know you've been working on this co-parenting in an amazing way.
Yeah. Well, I it sort of I I I already was full in the process of self awareness, and development of my own consciousness in a lot of things. So I actually did really well in that marriage, because I I kind of used it for my own acceleration. But there,
Ah, okay.
so, and I'm not saying I was doing that very consciously at the moment, at the time, but in hindsight, I can definitely see that was for me a huge acceleration in my own, my own process of becoming more conscious and aware of who I truly am. So, but after a while, once you start to really know yourself, I could definitely see that things were not how they were supposed to be. And there were a couple of moments where, I just couldn't um, glamour it away, or sort of swipe it under the rug. Is that an expression in
Ab-
English too? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. So there came a time when I actually knew I was going to want a divorce. And yeah, that just,
So
it
these,
was a process. It's not something, I think, in a situation like this, it's never this moment that you really know, because you're always doubting yourself, right? That's
of
part of the
course,
process too. And just finding your footing and finding your own truth is hard in that situation. But again, on the other hand, it really, really brought me to my true self. So, and once that happened, it still took me about 2 years, I think, to finally make it
hmm
all final. And I have to say, in hindsight, I wish I didn't know about narcissism then. I didn't know anything about it. In hindsight, I wish I'd known more, because
right.
I have done some things, agitated my ex-partner. The biggest mistake I would say I'd made is that when once I finally said I wanted a divorce, he said he didn't want kids. And I was so indignant about that and so angry that he wouldn't take any responsibility, that I kind of forced his hand and said, you have to take care of the kids too. It's not, we did this together, and you have to take your responsibility. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that.
Right.
Now that I know about narcissism, I wish I would have just said, thank you, I'll take them, bye.
Yes. Yes.
That would be, but I
What
didn't
a
know. So
what
yeah.
a wonderful insight, because there are so many people who probably wish they'd even had that option, you
Yeah.
know, because of the
Yes.
difficulty. But you did say it was very interesting what you said about, as you became more aware, there were things that you realized were not as they were supposed to be. Can you elaborate on that and tell us how you became aware, and what you discovered wasn't as it was meant to be, as you put it? What wasn't meeting your needs?
Yes. Well, the relationship between my ex-husband and me was always very much based on um, me being quite aware of who I was and what I was doing, and uh, and him being quite um, unapologetic about not in any way taking me into any consideration
Yeah.
in our life. But I always sort of accepted that, and I thought, well, like I said, I was glamoring that. I thought it was a good thing that he was so self-assured and that he was so clear on what he wanted, and I didn't really believe that that it was, like we said, right? The way you're grown up, the way you grow up. I didn't really believe that I had the right to be taken into consideration. But that started to change because I saw a few relationships around me that sort of surpassed all of that, and I thought, well, they can do it. Why couldn't we? And he had a lot of outspoken opinions about relationships and how fake everything was with everybody else. Um, and I kind of believed him when I was younger, but then I started to see that it's actually very possible to have a very loving and kind relationship, and it's not fake at all. And that's when I started to
Oh,
see, like, no, it's not really true what he's saying. So even though he's very self-assured and he has these very strong opinions and that's just the way it is, it doesn't mean that it's true.
yeah.
um, and I used to be more believing of what he said about those things. And there was this one moment where it was my sister-in-law. I remember that very clearly because she was. We were on this vacation, and my ex-husband was. He was being quite difficult, but I always thought it was me. It was
As
my
we
opinion
do.
of him. So, and then we went away by the car, and she just sighed to me. She said, "Oh my God, you're so patient with him. And I was like, really? Because I thought I was very impatient and unkind. And she was like, oh my God, no, you're so patient. You're so kind. You're so, it's like, I can't believe how much space you give him to do all that. And that really opened my eyes a bit because, well, he used to tell me all the time that I wasn't.
Of
So
course.
yeah, of course. So I just, and I was okay with that. I just sort of assumed that I was very impatient and very unkind. I don't know. But when she said that, I actually started to ask questions. So I said, well, why? What do you see? What do you hear? Because I was very curious. And at first she thought I was joking. That was the funniest part. She thought I was joking.
Ah,
And I was like, no,
okay.
no, I'm not kidding. Just tell me, explain to me what happened. What do you see? And we talked for about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And after that, that really shifted my perspective. And again, after that, it still took maybe 1 or 2 years, but that really helped. That, and afterwards, friends told me, they said, well, you used to have these talk with us about how bad things were, but then within 2 or 3 days you shifted and
Ah,
everything was
okay.
fine again. So I think a part of being in a relationship like that is that you really don't want to hear the truth. And you really don't want, I mean, I used to hide things from my friends and my family. I
Mm,
did, in hindsight, I deliberately not told people things because I knew they would criticize it or ask me uncomfortable questions like, why are you not leaving? Why are you still there? Why aren't you, divorcing or whatever? So that's all in
I can,
hindsight pretty obvious. But when you're in it, I'm sure people can relate to this. When you're in the situation, I've often compared it to the frog in the water, right?
yes,
It's boil.
it's warmer.
It's slowly warming up, and you're just not jumping out because you adjust. Yeah, that's basically what you do.
And I can, I'm sure I won't be the only person. I can relate to so much of what you have said, especially in the glamorizing, um, because my marriage has also been, and my husband has some extreme narcissistic behaviors, and he is getting better, and he is doing a lot of work on it. But the glamorizing that you talk about, I used to do that all the time to excuse everything. And I
Yeah.
can certainly relate to what you're saying about the hiding and the not saying, because you knew that people would be horrified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You,
So I
and
can
then in your
relate
mind you
so much.
sort of make excuses, but I would say to myself, like, if I say any of this to someone, they will be horrified, but I know I understand him. I know why he does this, and others won't understand. Which in hindsight is, of course, people don't understand because it's not okay.
Well, do you know what I used to do? And I think this will help people as well. I mean, a bit like you, it took me 4 years, a 4 year process to really get to grips with this behavior is not okay. Because as you say, you have the thought, you have the real, you kind of have the inkling, and then you have to work with that because you don't want it to be true. You don't want to admit that, oh my God, I'm dealing with either a narcissist or I'm dealing with this narcissistic behavior. This is awful. This can't be right. How on earth did I get here? And I think for a lot of us as well, we are quite often these people, they are up on a pedestal in terms of the eyes of other people, maybe in the institutions that they work in or where they have their hobbies, who they set themselves up to appear to be socially. They're kind of untouchable almost. And so my thing was, that was definitely the case with my husband, and I know that this is quite common. And I thought that if I tell anyone, no one's going to believe me, and they're going to think it's all me. I'm going to get all the blame. And actually, very recently, I actually fully revealed what had been going on. And that's exactly what happened. From anyone who was his friends, his family, I got the backlash. So,
Yes, that
you
happens a
know,
lot. But you know that I know this happens a lot. Exactly the way you describe it. In my case, and this also happens, so this is why I mention it. I think by the time we divorced, a lot of we never mixed friends. So
mhm.
I had my own friends, and he sort of kept his. A lot of his friends already broke off contact with him because they already.
Ah,
That happens too, you know. That you're like the only one who doesn't
see
see
it.
it or doesn't, yeah. And a lot of my friends already knew too, not exactly what and why, but a lot of people, well, actually there's these profiles which I'm sure you're aware of, that like the partner of a people with of a person with narcissistic traits. That's a whole profile in itself.
Mm, mm.
You know, once you start to work with that, you really have to wake up to some of your own stuff
Oh,
too, because
absolutely. God,
yeah,
that's
because I was always willing to harmonize. I was always willing to look to myself. What did I do wrong? You know, whenever we had an argument, and it would become bad, and then afterwards we would talk, and I would say all the things I thought I did wrong, you know, and I could have done differently, and then he would agree with me. And that was it.
yeah,
So there was never a moment where actually he would pick up his stuff um, and understand why he could do things wrong. He would just agree with me.
right.
So yeah, and but I think a lot of people in his environment were aware of this already. I
Okay.
know about at least 4 of his best friends from like youth didn't want to see him anymore, so they must have had some sort of fallout where they were, you know, not amused with the way he was behaving. But
Yeah.
I was kind of the last.
Yeah. And then we have to also accept that there are the other situations where literally they switch personalities according to who they're with. So with
That's true, yeah.
me, although my friends knew what was going on and had done for a while, because thank God I had them to confide in, his friends didn't know because I was literally the only person that he behaved that badly with.
Yes, that happens a lot too. I know. Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. So in a lesser way with other people, he had some of those traits, but he himself now agrees that he was a completely different person with and to me, which is interesting because sometimes people will ask me, well, do people with NPD or with these traits, do they actually know? And I'm like, yes, they know. Maybe your husband not, because in his case, he was like it all the time. But in situation like mine, where he's literally switching personalities according to who he's with, then yes, he knew, because he
Yeah,
knew he couldn't behave with other people like he was with me.
yeah, and
So
I also sometimes I wonder to what extent this knowledge is very conscious or more of a like intuitive manner,
mhm,
you know, because well, I would say in hindsight, especially after we divorced, that he lied a lot. He like lied about, because he, for instance, told everybody I took away the kids, which I
right.
never did. But because I, you know, I tried to get a conversation with a mediator and other people for months, and he just didn't agree to any of it. And then after like 7 or 8 months, I sort of in despair decided to keep the kids at my place because they were doing very badly there.
Oh,
But
okay.
and he told everybody that I took them out of the blue. It was like a complete and utter surprise to him. but I actually believe that he believes that. I think
Okay.
that in his experience, that's how it went. So I think there's very much different. Um, um, there's so many different nuances
Yeah,
and
absolutely. It's
yeah,
a
right.
spectrum. There are certain behaviors, there are
Yes,
certain traits. Someone might have some of them and not others. Yeah, it's a whole spectrum
very diverse.
of
Yeah,
of behaviors. But something very important has occurred to me in listening to you talk, and I think there's a very, very real difference here, because a lot of people, in particular that I see, of course, they're very, very broken by their narcissistic relationship. And I'm listening to you, thinking about the way you've navigated through this, and I realize that the difference is that, just like me, you have done your healing whilst in your relationship. So
yes,
uh, you haven't let it destroy you. You've
no,
realized what it was doing and done the work. Now mine did destroy me, but then I did the work, and
yeah.
now
Well,
I'm
that's kind of, yeah. I have to say, I was, I came to a place where it was very dark. So I
okay.
did I did go very dark for a while, and but I do remember before we divorced that I once told him, I said, I am going to be happy in this life no matter what, if it's
Okay,
with or without you, but I will be happy. That
there's that
is,
decision.
yes. And I remember there was a certain shock on his face, because up till then he sort of had a lot of power, but
Hmm.
I think that moment he realized that I was actually going to be happy no matter what, if it's with him or without him. And of course, it turned out it was without him. But yes, I did a lot of work. That's true. And but I have to say, as probably most people who listen to this, and probably you, I don't know if you have children, but when we were married and when we had young kids, I did a lot of things that I had to face and forgive myself for. Because, as I'm sure you're aware, when you're in a relationship with a person like this, you lose yourself completely.
Yes.
And
Oh my
and
God,
I lost
thank you
myself
for saying that.
completely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for pointing that out, because, when we're in a relationship and we ourselves are depleted and we cannot emotionally regulate ourselves, we don't parent in the way that we want to.
No, that's very true. Yeah.
And just like you, like my boys are 23 now. Um, but I had to go back once I started doing the work on myself. And yes, I had to fix things with them and help them fix some things for themselves. And
Yeah.
as you say, forgive myself and have compassion on myself. And it really helped that I did the work with my boys. They were in their late teens, early 20s, and I started to work all this through with them. And they were at an age where they also had good understanding, and they were able to process this with me. And it was an amazing experience, and it was very, very, the outcome was very positive for all of us. But I say we have to, sorry for swearing a little bit here, but we have to own our shit. We
Yes,
do.
definitely.
We
Yes,
can't.
and I've done a couple of terrible things to my kids when they were smaller. They're now, my kids are 16 and 17, and we've been talking openly about this for the last 6 years. So I started young with them.
Hmm.
Um, but I've done some things I couldn't even imagine doing now. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
I'm
even understand how I came to that place where I did that. And yeah, that's hard. In
Yeah.
hindsight, that was hard. I think in the whole healing process, those were the hardest things to sort of face
I
your demons. Like, yeah.
I would say exactly the same, because one of my sons had some real anxiety issues for a few years, and I had no idea until I started to do all this work. I had no idea that it was actually down to us. No one that was helping him came to us and confronted us about how we were and told us that we had caused this. But
Okay.
when I worked that out, I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And I had to fix that with my son. I had to
Yeah.
let him know that I knew that this was my fault and that I could not apologize enough, you know.
Yeah, and that's very healing, I think.
It
Yeah.
was very healing. It was very healing for both of us. And here's what he said, because he's in his, like, he's 23 now, and it was probably about a year ago that I was going over something again, because like I couldn't apologize enough. And like you say, we have to forgive ourselves, and it's the hardest thing. And I think something probably came up, and I just said, oh my goodness, I need to just mention to you this again. And he just said, Mum, he said, it's okay. He said, when I was an adolescent, my job was to blame you, and it kept me stuck. He said, but now, he said, now I'm an adult and my job is to move on and to realize that you did your best with what you had and who you were. And we need to leave it there.
No, that's very
And
beautiful.
that was a beautiful place to get to. It was very hard. And I share this so that I can encourage other people to not ignore the damage that you might have done to your kids. Whether you meant to or not is irrelevant. And most of us, there are some terribly abusive parents around, but most of us, we do the damage to our kids because we're dealing with our own stuff.
Yes, that's I recently told because my younger son is getting trauma treatment actually because of a lot of
Right,
what happened, and
right.
also, well, there
That
was some
makes
more
sense to
stuff.
me.
Yeah, and I we when we were speaking, I to the like have this intake. I I said the biggest regret I have is that I had to work through my own trauma
Mm,
before, well, during my parenthood when he was a
yes,
young kid. And that's just the way it is.
yeah,
But at the same time, I'm so proud and glad that from, I don't know, like I said, about 6 7 years ago, I could become the parent I actually am the
hmm,
parent I actually am. And and they have seen the contrast, which is a very valuable thing in itself,
yes.
you
That's
know.
I would say that we are all, myself and my two sons, and Mark to a degree. He's still very detached from the boys, but he's in himself. He's a much better person than he used to be. So we have all seen enormous changes from confronting this, but not. I think it's important that you don't confront it in a way where you're trying to blame,
No, no,
but
no.
in a motivation that comes from understanding and healing.
Yes.
That's what you need
Yeah,
to
and I
be.
also think the situation that I'm getting from you, where your husband is working on this, I think that's very extraordinary. I don't hear that often.
No,
um,
but I tell you
so
how that came about. He had no idea. He would never own any of his behavior. He had no idea. Like he would tell me all the things about, I expected too much, I was too demanding, I was just too difficult, I was impossible. And then he asked me to do a hypnotherapy session with him. And it wasn't like, he didn't say, you're so unhappy, I need to do a hypnotherapy session and find out why. What he said was, can you do a hypnotherapy session with me and find out why I'm so unhappy? And the amazing thing was that in that session, what he uncovered was a deep sense of not deserving a great life, not deserving what he needed and wanted, and not deserving to be happy. So after the session, we did some healing in that session. It really made me cry to see him hurt so much. And he realized that he was carrying this burden of feeling like he didn't deserve, and that he was projecting that onto all of us.
well, that's amazing.
That was, honestly, when we talk about transformation, just that point there, if he hadn't done that, he would still be who he was.
Yes.
It was a massive turning point. Like you say, I mean, it's not like you do that and everything's perfect. It's then a journey from there, but it was a journey from a totally different viewpoint, because his viewpoint then was, oh, I'm really at fault here. I really have to fix this. I really have to try and sort myself out.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah,
very,
and that's
very
amazing. And
difficult.
I think when we talked about like the definition or the difference between narcissistic personality disorder or having these traits, that's very accurate, because I think that when you have because I can see into, in people's energy system, right? What I can see is that when someone is like narcissistic, there's actually some sort of a disconnection there.
Hmm.
It's not really easy to heal, but there's a lot of people who have these narcissistic traits, and that's from their own trauma and
Yes,
things
absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
talking about, and that's different. I just the other day I had a conversation with someone. She said, sometimes I worry that my ex-husband, who is now her husband again, is narcissistic. And then I said, well, what happened when you two were separated? And she said, well, everything went really well, and we were able to work out really good arrangements for the kids, and it was all very loving and kind. I said, well, that's not a narcissist. I mean, I understand that in your relationship he displays a lot of these traits, but when someone is capable of doing that,
Mm,
then you cannot do that when you're narcissistic, because you cannot have the empathy to even
yeah.
think about what's best for the kids.
Yeah.
You don't even understand what that means, because I remember that the people who were guiding us on this whole divorce trajectory, they would ask my ex-husband things like, so what do you think the kids need? And then he would just be sort of confused, and then he would start talking about his needs. So it was
Ah,
like his brain just couldn't. It's like some sort of scrambling. He couldn't. He didn't understand what that meant,
yeah.
and that's pretty. Yeah. So
In
and when you deal
fairness,
with that, I don't have any experience with what you're talking about. That someone actually understands and admits, I have to work on myself.
yeah, in fairness, it still comes from a narcissistic viewpoint, though, because it comes from, when we did this session was the first time after that that he did start to display empathy, which was amazing because I'd never seen that in before. That was one of the reasons that made me certain about his narcissism, because he absolutely was totally focused on himself and just could not relate to anyone else's unhappiness or needs or wants, or the fact that a broken promise was very distressing for someone. He had no concept of those kind of things. And even now, his need to work on himself came from, he didn't say, I need to work on myself because you're so unhappy. What he said was, I need to work on myself, otherwise you might leave and I need you.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
So that was
That's
very interesting in itself, that
yes.
his working
Very.
on himself isn't about my happiness, although
No.
it is to a degree, but
No,
it's
yeah,
very
but
much
it's with a hidden agenda to keep
that,
you with him.
absolutely,
Yeah, I
the
get it. Yes.
motivation is, if I don't, like, he just assumed that I would always stay. And
Yeah.
then when he realized what was going on, and he's like, well, she probably won't, she's very close to leaving and I'm not even sure how she's still here. It was, yeah, so I need to do this. And how much work is he doing? And yeah, he is making improvements for sure, but
Yeah.
it's still very, the jury's still out, believe me. But I'm like you, I've done my healing and I'm okay in this space, and I have amazing boundaries, and it's all good. So,
Yeah.
but what I'm very interested in from your experience, that was a great conversation. I hope that was just really helpful to people. But I just so admire, like, my boys were older by the time I got to grips with all this. But you've got children at home, and I just so admire the way you are doing this co-parenting. So can you tell us something about that, how you are managing that, and how you are keeping things seemingly so stable, and how you are managing to protect your kids? Because I know for a lot of people, it's how on earth do I protect my kids in this situation?
Yeah. Well, I first of all, I understand that, and the I think for most people in this situation, there's a couple of things that really keep you in fear. There is this very unreal fear that the kids might be taken away from you. I had that.
Okay.
Very illogical. I was certain that there would come a time when they would just take the kids away from me, and they would have to grow up there, which is completely illogical. I even have a friend who works at child care services, or whatever you call it in Australia. And she used to say to me, Marieke, that's not possible, because there's laws, and they would always, I mean, in Holland, you could be like a drug addict and still use heroin, and still they would want you to see your kids. It's
Right.
like there's no way. But the fear was very real. So I worked with the fear of losing my kids when I would be honest. That's one thing. You have to sort of you have to face your fear of losing your kids, because that will keep you from making good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There's another thing that's very important, I think, and that is that you have to stop thinking that you have to do it together, because you
Right.
cannot do it together. You have to understand and accept that the same parent has to do it. So you have to take the responsibility of, I mean, I am totally responsible for my kids' psychological, physical, and financial welfare. And I completely embrace that. So when I stopped expecting things from my former husband, that's when things improved a lot.
That's
Because
brilliant advice.
as long as you have these expectations, it's very easy to feel like you don't get enough. You don't get enough support. You don't get enough financial aid. I mean, I get enough. I get 50 euros a month for for two kids. He told me, you wanted this, you can pay for it. That's
Right.
basically so. And I used to be so angry about that. It was so unfair. But you have to let go of all of that. You just have to accept you are the one. The healthy parent has to take full responsibility. That makes it a lot easier, because then you can start to observe instead of get emotionally into it, and you can actually make very informed decisions based on what you see happening with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
That means that sometimes, I mean, when my kids go to their father, I always ask them, did you have a good time? And they say, yeah, we had fun. We watched a movie, he cooked. And I'm very happy for them. I'm honestly happy for them. They can feel that. But when they have a bad time, I'm there for them.
Right.
But I'm not there for them with my own stuff,
Mm-hmm.
with my the past. Sometimes I am. I mean, I'm not a saint or something. But then sometimes they can sense that it's not really about them. There's some grudges I'm putting in there, and I'm saying, oh, sorry, it's not, let's forget about it. I'm happy that
Because
you
it's
can go
not for
there.
them to deal with, as you say. They're already
Yeah.
dealing with enough. They
Yes,
can't
they're
deal with
already
your
dealing with
stuff
enough.
as well. Yeah.
Yes. So basically, lose the fear of losing your kids, because that's very important, that you stop thinking that you're wrong. Then work with your own shit. Like you say, you have to clean up your own mess and become strategic. You have to be strategic when dealing with people like this, because sometimes you know, sometimes it's even more strategic to say something that you really don't mean at all, just to keep the other person happy, so the
Sure.
kids will have a good weekend.
Right.
But you can only do that when you're healed enough inside that it won't
Yes.
drain on yourself.
Yes.
So you to really be, so I would, he would do something really shitty. And I knew if I call him and I say to him, how can you do that? You cannot treat the kids like that. That would just make a big mess. So I wouldn't do that. And I would call a friend, cry, scream, whatever I needed to do to get it out of my system and to honor myself, my own emotions. And then to him, I would just say, well, I hope you guys have a really good weekend, and I'm sure that you have lots of fun things planned because you're a really good dad.
Because that's what he needs to hear to keep
That's
the
what he
peace.
needs to hear. And then they would have a good weekend there. And, that's my purpose, that the kids would have a good weekend there. And now that they're older, it's a little bit different. We found out soon enough between the three of us, my two sons and me, that whenever he wanted something and I didn't do it, he would take it out on them. So he would use the kids as revenge, which happens a lot, unfortunately. I started talking to the kids about that at a pretty early age. So, because sometimes you just cannot cross your own boundary. There's only so much you can do before it really starts to eat you, even though you've healed. So if he would do things that were, or want things from me that I really thought, no, that's just crossing my border, I would talk to my boys and say, look, your dad wants me to do something. I don't want to do it. Now, if you go there this weekend, there's a chance that he will take it out on you and that he will start problems. If he does, just know it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. He's just angry at me. If it becomes too much, just call me and I'll come get you. And that's what we did. And that happened once or twice. But then you have to understand that he's also smart. And he would see that and he would understand that by doing that, and the kids were aware of it, that it's not serving its purpose anymore. Because because we were so out in the open about it, it doesn't serve his purpose. So he stopped basically doing that. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that for people with these narcissistic traits is that everything, as long as it's hidden, it gives power.
Yes.
But once you start to unveil the stuff and talk really openly about it, and honestly, without guilt, shame, and judgment, and anger and rage, but just like observative and sort of detached and strategic, there's really not a lot of power in there anymore for them. And that's actually the way I went with my kids. And now, they go there, they have fun. He's their dad. I know that. And I will never come between them, but he's not their parent. And they know that too.
Right.
They know they're more mature and more aware for a long time now. They started saying things like that to me ever since they were like 10 or 11. They said, Mom, it's actually us that's being adult. And I said, I know, sweetie, it's okay.
And how wonderful that you can do that with them, and that you have managed this in such a, so even if he's being toxic and being nasty, you've managed it from your end where you're not.
Yes.
And totally taken the power out of it.
Yes, that's what you do then. Yeah. And I'm not saying I did that, it was a little, figuring out. I made a lot of mistakes there and on the way here, but because I started so early with that, I think for the kids it worked out pretty well. And they just know, they're very aware they cannot really count on him for anything, but they also can have a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, so it was just so amazing that you've got to that place. And I love the fact that the damage isn't done, and how aware the kids are of who he is, but that they don't have to let that affect him, and that they can still have fun.
That's amazing, because the thing is, when you're not, it's very seductive to keep all this away from your kids.
Right.
But a friend of mine who's a psychologist, she once told me, now she's a psychiatrist, and she said to me, she said, look, Marieke, you're still trying to make things right, but you
Ah,
can't. The only thing you can do is to make your kids, what's that word? There's this Dutch word, resilient.
okay. Yeah.
You know, to the only thing your kids, the only thing that will help your kids get through this okay is when you're honest with them and they have to find a way through it, which is hard, but it's even harder when they think it's their fault. So out of two bad things, this is definitely the best one. I know not a lot of, like in Holland, the child care system doesn't really support this. They would prefer it. They're always steering towards harmony, which is very damaging, I think, because you cannot have harmony with a narcissistic person.
No.
So it's like a task that is impossible. It's way more empowering to, like I said, to do your own inner work apart from the person who's narcissistic. And with that person, have a very formal, clear, observative relationship and be strategic, plan ahead, make very good choices, not from your emotions, but from what can I do now that will help the kids or
Right.
help me. And I come to a place, because I did this, he doesn't want to have any contact with me anymore, because he was so sick of not having any influence and not being able to, scare me, or so he just doesn't want to have any contact with me. So he told the kids, I don't want to talk to her anymore ever, and she's like the enemy. And the kids are like, okay. And we talked about it with the three of us, and I said, well, that's fine, if he feels like that, that's okay. It's allowed. It just makes it a bit harder sometimes with school meetings and stuff like that. But overall, I have very little problems anymore, and the kids too. We have very little upheaval or
Yeah,
drama.
so yeah, absolutely. It's peace and calm. And what I love about this, I love the way that you've spoken here about involving the kids and letting them know what's happening, because so many of the problems that adults
Sorry.
present with, when we look back at what happened as children, it's because of all the things that they weren't told, the things they didn't
Yes,
understand, the things that
exactly.
weren't explained, and that they then took on as their fault. So
Yes,
this is a huge thing that you've hit on here, that when you can just work this stuff through and reassure them that none of this is their fault, and just answer all their questions and keep them informed and keep the toxicity out of it, or even if the other parent can't, you do that. So then the
yes,
kids are looking at you as the person who is calm and in control and the one that they can rely on. That you're their
yes,
safety, you're their security.
yes.
This
And again, it doesn't mean you have to be calm and in control all the time, but because that's inhumane, right? Especially with
sure,
narcissistic people, because they can totally upset you
yeah,
deeply in your core.
they can.
But it's a very good thing when you find your way to expressing all of that apart from the person who's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You can go all out to girlfriends
Yeah,
or friends, but just for your own sake, whatever it takes to remain sort of very clear and detached, that will tremendously help you. At one point I realized anything I give him, anything is too much. If I give him my emotion, I came to a point where I thought, well, since he cannot handle anything from outside, like from me, anything I give him is too much. Even my honest opinion, even my honest emotions, it's
right.
not something that I want to give him. So I don't give him anything anymore. That really
Yeah,
helps. I just don't, I don't want to give anything of myself to him.
Yeah.
And that helps me stay completely detached and observing, because, it's mean to say, but he's just not worth giving my true emotions or my true
Oh,
sentiments or my true opinions, because
yep.
he will take it and rip it to shreds.
Yeah.
So
and
I'm
that
not
and
going to
that's
give it
very
anymore.
that's very worth saying, because I think so long people invest so much of themselves,
Yes, keep
so much time
investing. Yeah.
and energy into trying to achieve something that they've got no hope of doing. So
No.
I love the points you've made. And the other thing that I think is really important here is to point out that even in situ, you can heal. And I get
Yes.
this a lot from people, and they'll say to me, well, I can't deal with my CPTSD at the moment because I'm still in the situation. You can.
Oh, yes, you
And
can.
if you do, it will be hugely beneficial. And here's you, and here's me, and so many other women that I've spoken to and dealt with, and we do this healing in situ, and it changes things enormously. And the idea, no, you can't change your situation per se, but you can definitely change how you show up, what you allow, what you allow this to be when you start to do your healing in situ. Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see you as you are, and to understand that you did this whilst you were in this situation, as did I. Yeah. But
Yes. But I would like to add, though, that after the divorce, I only then, I think I sat on the couch for a year, staring out of the window, being just blissful, happy. For the first year after the divorce, I was just so happy to be not in that situation
yeah, of
anymore,
course,
even though
freedom.
I didn't realize. And then, because we had co-parenting, things started to happen with the kids. And then I
Okay.
had to deal with that. And that's when I started to read up on narcissism and stuff like that. So before that, I didn't know anything about it. Um, so I would have to say that a lot of this I also did outside of the situation, just
Right.
to clarify, right? But inside, in the situation, like you say, I also did a lot of work, and that is very possible. I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because what it did, it allowed you, like you said, you started to see and hear all the things that you didn't want to
Yeah.
allow. So if you
Yes.
hadn't started to do that work, you wouldn't have got to the place where you could say, hey, this isn't right for me, I'm not allowing this, and you just would have carried on accepting. And I
Yes.
think that's the important thing, because that's exactly what happened to me as well. I started to see things and to put personal boundaries in place. Whether he liked it or not, I just became immovable in what I would allow. And it, yeah, that helped
That
me
changed. Yeah.
enormously. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And I also would like to add that every situation is really different, right?
Yes, of
Because for
course.
me, there was some violence,
Okay.
when I would, set these very strong boundaries, but not well. Every violence is excessive. Let's be clear on that. But I also know of women I'm sorry, who had have to be. No, that's not real English. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
hard.
that tense is a
Yes,
very,
you
very
you know what
difficult
I mean.
one.
I had
Yeah.
to become in the situation, like you said, very aware and very strategic, because
Yes.
otherwise they would actually be in danger, and their kids too. So that's very important to think about that,
That
and to not, you know, when you start to get into this and you find stuff out, don't share it immediately. Don't
no.
go talk to this person and share it, and accuse them of stuff and blame them for stuff, because you could actually create a dangerous situation for
Yes.
yourself.
Yes. Make sure you're safe. And I can also say, I to be honest, I would have been certain that I was physically safe. Um, but I have had a couple of occasions where I wasn't.
Yeah,
So
me
yeah,
too. Yes. Yeah,
absolutely.
and actually the situation here now is that after I lived here for a year, I think a year and a half, there was a situation here, and that made me deny him access to my house,
Mm-hmm.
at all costs, and the kids know that. And they asked me a few times about it, and I said, well, things happened. he never apologized. He never said, I won't do it again. So until any recognition or acknowledgement takes place, I will not change that rule. And they're okay with that now. So,
But look at what you did. You didn't leave them wondering. You didn't leave them scared. You didn't leave them thinking it was about them. They,
no, we didn't.
that's what I'm saying. This is where children sometimes so much of the damage is done, when children don't understand, because they will blame themselves. Um,
Yes.
and you've made that clear. And I just, this is the theme that keeps coming through with you, where you are so in touch with your kids, and you are making sure at every stage that they understand what is happening, that it's not about them, that they're not to worry about it. It's not their responsibility. And I think this is huge. This is huge learning, and just wonderful advice. And I think that I understand totally. Everyone's situation is very, very different. And some people don't have a hope in hell. Some people can barely get through dinner without an explosion. But for other people who are looking at their situation, I'm sure there are things they're going to take from you, and be able to apply and to understand what is possible. And I think that what you've done and the way you've handled things is quite incredible. And obviously your kids will be the ones that benefit from that. And as you say, as the healthy parent, the parent in charge, that should always be our motivation, that
Yes.
our
Yeah.
kids come out with the best possible outcome, that we
Mm-hmm.
protect our kids as much as we can. That
Yeah.
has to be the focus.
Yes. And there's one more thing I'd like to add, because you said the co-parenting. I have to say, though, the co-parenting ended at a certain point, because I decided to take the kids I told the kids, you're living with me now, after things were going badly there. So I did that, which was scary because it was against the judge's orders.
Yeah.
And I was afraid then, too, that they would take the kids away. But it was becoming, it was irresponsible to let them stay there for a longer time, because um, they were put in a position where they had to take so much adult responsibilities that I thought it was life threatening.
Okay.
And then, I mean, like, my younger son wasn't able to cycle. Yeah, we all ride bikes here in Holland. And then in the morning, in the rain, in the dark, they would have to cycle to school. And then the older son, who was only 1 year older than his brother, was told to make sure that his younger brother didn't get run over by a car, stuff like that. And I thought,
Wow, too much
now it's going too
responsibility.
far. This
Yeah.
is not good anymore. I really have to, do something drastic. But even then, I talked to the school. I talked to to our physician. I think is that
Yeah.
what it's called? Yeah.
Yeah.
I talked to an organization here that deals with emergency situations. So I didn't make these decisions all by myself. I
Right.
checked and checked and checked and double checked, and then I did that. I went to school. I picked them up and I said, "You're not going back for a while." They were very angry with me, by the way. They didn't want that, of course, because they didn't want the problems and the trouble.
Yeah.
And that led to, well, first a couple of weeks of no contact at all, because even though I expected all hell to break loose and the police coming at my door, nothing happened. After a little while, contact started to, because that's another thing. It's very good to lean back and just allow things to unfold, because we're the people who are like the healthy parents are often very invested in doing the right thing and making things right.
Okay.
But one of the things I learned then was that by just doing an action and then leaning back and allowing things to unfold, nothing really bad happened. a lot less bad than when I was keeping sort of trying to get a response, trying to get reactions, trying to make, agreements and all that stuff. I just sort of dropped it. And that was very helpful because then, yeah, sure enough, I got an email that said, if you don't, you have to do this or I will do that. And I said, "Oh, sure, then we can do that." But it was his, how do you call that? On his instigation,
Yeah.
me picking things up. I just sort of left it. And then he started to pick things up. And then, things were, it led to court and it was hard, it was very difficult. But, in the end, the kids are living with me. And
Mhm.
they still see him every 2 weeks for a long weekend, but they live here now. And that is, I think it's very important for the healthy parent to have the main upbringing under control.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of parents who know that they are the healthy parent who aren't lucky enough to have been awarded that and wish they could, and are well aware that what's in the best interest of the kids has not been the priority, that the other parent just wanted to win no matter what.
Yeah,
I'm sure that there's
yeah,
a lot of people. In fact, we have an interview in this series with a woman called Nikki, and same thing happened to her, and she lost custody of her kids.
yeah.
And
That's very scary.
she had been the full time parent, and what that did to the kids, I can't imagine. I
No,
can't imagine.
that's terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
no,
is terrible.
no consideration there for what was right for the kids. Yeah, but anyway, that's another. So, well, thank you so much. I think that what you've shared is incredible, invaluable. I think what you have done, where you've got to, how you've handled all this is amazing. And clearly, the winner is not only you, but the winner is also your kids, which
Well,
for
and in a
everyone
certain
listening.
way, I think also my ex-husband,
Well,
because
yes.
because he can enjoy his kids without having any responsibilities, which is ultimately what he likes. Because as soon as he gets responsibilities, it's very stressful,
Yeah.
and he starts to sort of, it doesn't work.
Hmm.
So ultimately, I think this is the best situation for all of us. And I'm very sorry to hear, I know these stories too, of course. In Holland, we have the same kind of stories like you just said about Nikki. And yeah, that's terrible when these things happen. I don't know, probably she has given some advice on how to prevent that. I don't know. But for me, the leaning back worked and the being totally honest and transparent worked. Um, but
Well, hers,
yeah.
like everyone's, hers is an incredible story of how she turned that around, because she hadn't done her own healing, and when that
Ah,
happened to her, she decided at that point that this was her. She was never going to let this destroy her, and that she was going to do her healing and concentrate on herself.
that
So
is amazing.
yeah,
Yes.
it's really the courage and the resilience that she showed is phenomenal. Yeah,
Amazing.
yes, that's the word. Just yeah, so inspired, so humbling, the things that people go through, and how they come out the other side. It just, and that's why, of course, why we're doing all of these, to show people what's possible, and that these things don't have to defeat and destroy you. There is a way through,
There
and
is. Yes.
knowledge that everyone is different. But what seems impossible, there's a saying that what seems impossible is simply a set of questions waiting for the answer. That's so that's how we process things, and how we move forward if we want to heal and move forward. But yeah. So
Nice.
thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for what you've shared. Um, and if you don't mind, I'm not sure if you send me some links. Then if people need to get in touch with you and want to, we can put those in the notes for them. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Anyone who really wants advice from you can go through me. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you
I'll
for.
send you the link for my website. It's all in Dutch, but I heard that Google translates
Oh, it
it.
does. It does. Yeah, so tell us, what's your website about?
It's just my name, and so mariekezwinkels.com.
Yeah.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
okay, so do you do this kind of is it tips and advice about this narcissistic co-parenting and
No,
things
not just
like that?
this. It's actually what I do is I help people unveil themselves to get
Ah,
to the truth of you. And so I happen to have a lot of customers who have had narcissistic parents or
of
relationships
course.
because,
Yeah,
that's, yeah.
that's who you would
But
attract. That's who your
yeah,
energy and yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
absolutely.
So I have, I've developed all by my own experiences. Just like you said, I have developed an online program which is called the Freedom to Fly, and it has like 7 modules. There's these 7 modules actually deal with the biggest traps in
Mm-hmm.
unveiling yourself, like guilt, shame, and
Wow.
judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
We talked about that. I think you agree that guilt, shame, and judgment is one of the biggest. I call them the big 3. They
It's
keep you
huge,
in
but they keep
place
you stuck.
so bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's forgiveness, and there's a couple of other things. Your relationship with time, for instance. People often think they don't have enough time. They're too late. It's too late for them, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
But I also do some energy work with people. I teach them how to disconnect energetically and how to clear their space. Because one of the things personally, and I know this isn't for everybody, but one of the things I found uh, while I was going through all of this is that with energetic work, that actually changed my life so much, because the influence that a narcissistic person has on your energy system is huge. So
So that would
I
affect your body. This is what people
yeah,
don't
it affects
understand. That
everybody's,
yes.
there's actually, and I think, I'm wondering if you experience this, but when a narcissistic person is with you in a room with, for instance, a lawyer or a judge or someone from child services, whatever,
You feel
they
it.
can actually send something out. It scrambles your brain. You don't know what you really want to say anymore. You get all confused. And I was being guided by someone else who taught me how to block that so I could
Right.
stay clear. And that helped me so much. So that's the kind of stuff. But that's actually very helpful for anybody, not just people with these
Wonderful.
problems. So,
Well,
yeah.
we'll definitely put your details up there, and if people want to contact you about that, obviously they can and they will.
Well, that's
So,
fantastic. Thank you.
thank you so much for everything you've shared. You've been a wonderful guest, and I think sure that what you've shared will be appreciated by many people listening.
Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this work, because we talked a bit up front, and I think it's marvelous that you're doing this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. We need more of us. So we need an army.
Yes, a movement, right?
Yeah, a movement. Absolutely.
Yes, go
Yeah, a
for it.
movement. I know, a movement. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, it needs to be a movement, not just a podcast and not just therapy sessions. We'll have to carry on working that and see what we can do. So,
Yes, amazing.
yeah,
I'm in.
you and thousands of others, I'm sure. Yeah, it's just like, am I brave enough to do that? We'll see. So, all right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Sarah. Me too. Same here.